Wasabi guys, coming back at y'all with another top 10 video. This time we're going to be going over, it is a little bit funny, but we're going to be going over the top 10 best unstable cards for the Commander format, because yes, technically these are legal until mid-January when they update the ban list, and finally come to the conclusion that a lot of these cards are just going to be unhealthy for the format, going to cause so much chaos and mayhem, but there's definitely some of these cards that are pretty moderate. They're pretty easy to understand. They're not going to ruin the game as it is. Some commander options actually look quite fun and look pretty playable, along with a lot of other similar commanders that are actually legal. So before we get into the actual top 10, as always, we're going to be going over some honorable mentions. The first one is Baron von Count. Now I know it's a little bit weird destroying a target player, but you have to have cards with the mana cost 5, 4, 3, 2, and then 1, or else he's just going to be sitting there and he has no protection, no staying power on the field. Likely he's going to be hated out of the game because once you get the countdown to 1, you destroy a player and then it starts all over again, and people don't want to be destroyed, so they're likely going to gang up on you, get this off the field before you're able to get the countdown back to 1, and whenever you have to replay him, it just starts all over again, so it can be quite a pain. There's really no synergy here aside from just playing cards with converted mana costs that are very specific towards what you want to do here. So as far as flavor goes, I don't really see much there. The next one on the honorable mentions, we have Hot Fix. This card is actually quite good when you think about it. It is 6 mana, and for 10 seconds you get to rearrange your deck in any order, put it back, but you have to do that within 10 seconds, or if you take any longer, then you have to shuffle your library, and it was all done for nothing. So ideally, if you have really quick hands and you're really good at identifying the cards in your library, you ideally want to take the best card from your deck, or maybe the 2 best cards, and then find a way to put them on the top of your deck. You don't have to reshuffle or anything like that, but within 10 seconds you want to take whatever good cards you have, put it on top of your library. Unfortunately, that's all it does. It doesn't put the cards right into your hand. So a card like this would be fantastic in EDH, but unfortunately the time restriction there, you can only do so much with 10 seconds. I know it might seem like a lot longer than what it actually is to some people, but 10 seconds isn't that much time. The next one is the Big Idea. Actually, I'm thinking of making a commander deck tech here pretty soon of the Big Idea. Only downside to this guy really is the fact that there aren't that many Brainiac creatures. There's only 3 to be exact. You could also throw in some changelings, adaptive automaton, metallic mimic, stuff like that to count towards being Brainiacs. Really kind of have to hope that he's able to stay on the field long enough to where you can use his activated ability. Get a decent die roll, which is only one 6-sided die, so unfortunately you kind of have to work with that. At most, you're only going to be getting 6 tokens off the first roll. If you have enough Brainiacs, then you can tap down 3 of them, and then you get more Brainiac tokens because you get to roll another d6. Unfortunately, that's all he really does, but you could throw something like a Perforos in there, make him a little bit more powerful. Still pretty interesting, though. Then we have Modular Monstrosity. Whenever your opponents would cast a spell, you have to choose a keyword that's ever been printed on a card really quickly, but if you take longer than 5 seconds, then it loses all of its keywords, so you have to start all over again. Ideally, though, you want to start off with something like Indestructible, Hexproof, Shroud, and then move up from that to Horsemanship, Flying, Shadow, whatever way that you can give evasion. Likely give it Infect, something like that, and Unblockable is the route to go. But aside from that, though, likely going to make you public enemy number 1 at the table. Now we move on to the actual top 10 here. Number 10 is Earl of Squirrel, the promo card that you got for the sealed events, draft events, whatever you got the promo card at. Definitely a very, very cool option here. Unfortunately, not a legendary creature. The Earl is just a regular non-legendary, so where he really fits in is probably in something like Prosh Skyraider of Care, any sort of deck where getting a ton of creature tokens is the norm. And really, when I say Prosh, I mean you're using him to get those little Cobalt tokens. They get +1/+1 because all of your creature tokens are also considered squirrels, and all of your squirrels get +1/+1, so it doesn't really matter what tokens you have, they're gonna get a little bit of a buff, which is never a bad thing. The Squirrel Link is just hilarious. It's awesome. It's super flavorful. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of squirrel support in Commander, so that's as far as this card's gonna go, but I think it's definitely an amazing inclusion as one of the 99 for a short period of time if you want to go that route. The number 9, we have Very Cryptic Command. Very similar to Cryptic Command, it's basically the same converted mana cost, and you have 4 different different options, 4 different modes that you can choose from. You can choose 2 of them at instant speed. The first one is untap 2 target permanents, so you can get a little bit of mana ramp there if you have lands that tap for more than 1 mana, or you just basically break even that way. And the second mode is tap each permanent target player controls with exactly 1 word in its name. A lot of different cards, a lot of different permanent types that only have 1 word in the name. Third mode is discard all cards in your hand, then draw that many cards. And then the fourth mode is return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So all of these modes are very powerful. Second one is a little bit weaker than just tapping down all your opponent's creatures, but it could definitely have its usefulness. The first one is basically just to break even if you are desperate for more cast triggers, more mana. The third one is discarding all cards in your hand to draw that many cards. Pretty good in Storm deck where you want to get as many different resources as you can to replenish and just fill your hand back up. And the last one is just good in an instant and sorcery sort of spells matter type of deck. Getting them back is pretty important. Just a very good card altogether. Number 8 is Insight. For 2 blue and an X, you get to assemble X contraptions, which I don't have any contraptions on this list because I feel like it's kind of iffy. You don't necessarily have the best synergies for Commander multiplayer when you have to wait till your upkeep to crank something, and you likely are going to have to wait a couple turns before you even get these effects again. But this is really the best way to take advantage of contraptions, is if you can dump a ton of mana into it and get maybe 7 different contraptions, spread those across 3 different sprockets, and then suddenly you have amazing upkeep, so you don't have to put any more mana into it. That's incredible when you just get stuff for free, all because you casted this one spell and you got all these contraptions from your contraption deck. Now, I believe you have to have at least 15 contraptions for Commander if you want to go that route. You can have more than that, but I believe that's the absolute minimum. So if you think about having infinite mana or anything like that and abuse it, dump it into X, you get a ton of these contraptions, and there are some pretty good ones. There's ones that make you tokens, there's ones that destroy creatures or non-land permanents, there's ones that destroy artifacts. It's pretty good. However, unfortunately, just the whole interactions with building contraptions, it doesn't really seem like there's a lot. Especially when it comes to legendary creatures, it doesn't seem like we have anything that interacts with contraptions beyond just assembling them. So that's the only downside. Number 7 is Grusilda, Monster Masher. So combined, enchanted, and equipped creatures you control have Menace. And she also has an activated ability of 5 mana tapper to put 2 target creature cards from your graveyards onto the battlefield combined into 1 creature under your control. So they basically gain the same power and toughness combined, abilities, the text, everything, it's all combined. So you're basically taking those 2 creatures, forming them into 1. So it's very similar to the Mimeoplasm. That's the first impression that I really get out of her, which is pretty cool. Definitely something to consider when you're making any sort of legendary creature as a commander, building a commander deck around that. She definitely has a lot of potential in the format. I think zombie interactions are very cool with this, and flavor wise, it's definitely a pretty big win here. And then for number 6, we have Dr. Julius Jumble Morph. Now, if you love changelings and if you love stuff like that, this guy is definitely for you. He is every single creature type possible. If you have any sort of tribal synergies, this guy is going to work pretty well with it. But aside from that, where I really think he shines, we have a ton of these augment creatures, we have a ton of the host creatures. You can throw a whole bunch of those into this type of deck, and it works perfectly because he basically allows you to search up anything you need for that whole mechanic to work. So if you want to really go with the flavor of unstable, realistically, you can put a ton of those cards into this deck and make it work. And I think flavor-wise, it works pretty well. Now keep in mind, not a lot of the host creatures and augment creatures are pretty powerful. You have some that stand out, such as the angel robot thing that was capable of destroying non-land permanents. That's pretty powerful if you can get that out there, but yet pretty cool. Then number 5, we have Old Buzzbark, the gigantic goblin dude that just looks menacing. He looks fantastic. When Old Buzzbark enters the battlefield, roll X 6-sided die onto the battlefield from a height of at least X inches. So keep that in mind. You have to basically come into an agreement with your opponents. Okay, this is about X inches. It's not an exact science, guys. But for each die, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to that result on each creature you control that the die is touching. And for each die that's touching an opponent's creature, it deals that much damage equal to that die roll. You can intentionally just throw all of them at your opponent's creatures in an effort to kill all your opponent's creatures, which is realistically what you want to do there. Or you could also just as reasonably throw all of the die around your creatures to try to get the most +1/+1 counters onto them. Either way, it's a very powerful strategy. X costs with die rolls, it is hilarious. It's definitely interesting. Usually with X cost, you know what you're getting, you know, okay, I'm going to be getting this out of X, but when it's coming to die rolls, it's just so much more interesting. You get to throw X different die. So whether you want to make your team bigger or just destroy your opponent's creatures, that's usually pretty good in Commander. Number 4, we have Spike Tournament Grinder. Another legendary creature option, and quite honestly, it just comes to no surprise that these types of cards do pretty well in the format as is, but when you throw in the fact that you can also play banned cards from constructed formats, you're going to have to come into some agreement with your playgroup what cards are going to be able to be played with this type of creature, banned cards for Commander or banned cards in Legacy, Modern, stuff like that. I think that's more important to establish that with your playgroup, so she would be higher if we honestly were able to just build a deck more flavorful around her. I think that she's pretty decent as one of the 99 if you want to go that route into just any black deck. I think that would be quite fun. It wouldn't be too overpowering, but as a commander option, Spike's going to get pretty out of control here. It is manageable from the fact that it is Phyrexian mana, so you either have to put 4 black mana into the activated ability or pay 8 life or any combination of the two. So it can kind of be a deterrent there, but usually it's not too much when you can just get something like a Scheherazade and just play that. That's pretty ridiculous. The only reason why she wouldn't be higher would be the fact that it's very unknown how your playgroups are going to react. I don't think people are going to be okay with playing cards like Scheherazade because they're just so ridiculous and they're banned for not just the reason that they're powerful, which Scheherazade really isn't that powerful, it's just freaking annoying. So clarify this with your playgroup before you even consider playing her, even if she's not just the commander but as one of the 99. Super powerful, but with great power comes great responsibility. Then number 3, we have Ursa Academy Headmaster. This guy absolutely had to be on the list because Super Friends are super playable in this format. And a 5-color Planeswalker, the only 5-color Planeswalker we even have. The fact that yes, it is from Unstable, but all of the abilities are not set in stone, so you can go online. His plus, his minus, and his alt are all randomized, so you can get older Planeswalker abilities or you can get newer Planeswalker abilities, so you never know what you're going to get, and it just goes with the flavor of Unstable, just goes with the flavor of unsets in general. But being the fact that this is the first time we've had an unset that acknowledged the existence of these Planeswalker cards, I think it's pretty cool that we actually have one. So there's no doubt in my mind that if you're playing Super Friends from now until mid-January, this is definitely something you should consider throwing into your 5-color Super Friends deck, if not for competitiveness, but for just having fun. I think he's pretty cool. Then number 2 is the Grandcalc. When he enters the battlefield, each player's hand becomes a program. So a program is basically a set of cards in a different order. So you have to play cards in the order of first to last. That is your program, and the card that is first is the one that you're able to play first, and then so on. And whenever you draw a card, instead of putting it into your hand, it goes into your program. So if you have 4 cards in your hand, you have to order it in a way from first to last, where last is the card that you want to play last out of those 4 cards. And also at the beginning of each player's end step, if that player's program has fewer than 5 cards, they draw cards equal to the difference. So it's a decent way to kind of speed up the game a little bit, but it's also going to be restrictive considering the fact that not everybody's program is going to be perfect. Some people are going to make mistakes with it. It's also powerful if you just want to have fun in the format. I think that's the cool thing about Commanders, that a lot of cards are good, not just because of their overwhelming power, but because of how they impact the game. It doesn't necessarily have to benefit you entirely. It could definitely just benefit players who just want to have fun rather than have to anticipate all these different removal spells, all these different answers, because you know what's coming in your players' programs. Counter spells are not unexpected, so people are going to be cautious. I think that's a pretty cool and underrated aspect of this card. And it's also good for group hug if you want to throw it into something like that. I don't think anybody would really complain about getting extra card draw at their end step. They might complain about having to reveal their hands, but other than that, a pretty powerful card. And then number 1, we have what is quite possibly the funniest card on this list. Cramped Bunker is just basically Jenga for Magic the Gathering. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player moves a permanent he or she controls to touch Cramped Bunker and no other permanents. If he or she can't, destroy each permanent that player controls that isn't touching Cramped Bunker, then sacrifice it. So the fact that this doesn't impact you at all, this doesn't hurt you at all, you don't have to put anything attached to it, I think that's hilarious. And it is kind of cruel when you consider the fact that mathematically someone's going to be forced to have to destroy all their permanents, or at the very least they're going to be forced to put a card and just hold it with their hand. I mean, this is kind of funny. This is just kind of how the unsets are. It could be a situation where you just touch the card. You don't actually have to leave it there. You could hold it there with your hand. It just doesn't have to touch any other permanents. So it's going to come to the situation where it's almost like Twister. And it's going to eventually turn into Jenga, where someone messes up and all of their permanents are destroyed, except for the ones that are touching it. So ideally, your opponents are going to want to put their most valuable permanents touching it, which can kind of be a bit annoying. But when you consider the fact that that's just what Commander is, it's all about having fun. Each turn, you're impacting the game in a different way. And I really can't think of a card that's as entertaining just to watch sort of progress turn by turn, just seeing how disastrous it turns out for your opponents, and just seeing everyone have a good time. That's really the spirit of Unstable and just unsets in general. So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed this top 10 list of the best unstable cards in the Commander format. Let me know what your favorite cards are, if you've been experimenting with unstable cards, if you have a favorite Commander already from the bunch. Let me know in the comment section below. Anyway, you all have a wonderful day. Void here signing off.